Hello everybody, thank you for joining me to today's edition of Daf Yomi, Menachot Menachot Daf 95 Amud B. Rabbi Eliezer says, one might have thought that if Zavim and leopards pushed their way in and entered, what does that mean? The wording here indicates that Rabbi Eliezer is leaning only after the fact, i.e., if these ritually impure individuals have already entered the temple courtyard. While the Paschal offering is being sacrificed in a state of impurity, Zavim and leopards may not enter the temple Abonisha, Rashi on Pesachim 68b. Rabbi Eliezer derives from the verse merely that Zavim and leopards are not liable to receive kavod in this case. The temple courtyard during the sacrifice of the Paschal lamb that is born in a state of impurity. If the time arrives to sacrifice a Paschal offering, or any offering that is the obligation of the entire community, and most of the community bringing it, or the priest who would perform the sacrificial rites are impure due to contact with a corpse, although in these circumstances the offering is sacrificed in a state of impurity, the individuals who are Zavim, or who are impure due to contact with an animal carcass or a dead creeping animal, should not be involved in the sacrifice of the offering, nor enter the temple courtyard in a state of ritual impurity. If they enter, they are able to receive kavod for entering, and death at the hand of heaven for performing the service, as ritual impurity is overridden only in the case of impurity imparted by a corpse, according to the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Eliezer. I'm saying for Vod Hilchot Beis Hamikdash 4:12. When the majority of neighbor which is impure due to contact with a corpse, that perhaps the Zavim and lepers are liable. In other words, one might have thought that since it is prohibited for Zavim and lepers to enter even in such circumstances, they would be liable to receive excision from the word to come kavod. Therefore, the verse states that they sent out from the camp any leper or any Zav, or anyone impure by reason of a corpse, in Numbers 5:2. The verse indicates that at the time when those who are impure with impurity imparted by a corpse are sent out of the temple, Zavim and lepers are also sent out of the temple and are liable to receive kavod if they enter it. But when those who are impure with impurity imparted by a corpse are not sent out of the temple, Zavim and lepers are also not sent out, i.e., they are not liable to receive kavod if they enter the temple. The Braita that teaches that once the curtain surrounding the tabernacle was rolled up, it was permitted for Zavim and lepers to enter the place where it had stood, as in accordance to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. The reason is that once the curtain was rolled up, it was permitted for those who were impure with impurity imparted by a corpse to enter. It was prohibited for them to enter only in the temple courtyard, and this had been dismantled. According to Rabbi Eliezer, it was permitted even for Zavim and lepers to enter the camp. The Braita that rules that even when the tabernacle was dismantled, Zavim and lepers were sent outside the camp is according to the opinion of the rabbis. In the Mishnah, in the case of the 2 loaves and the shewbread, the dispute between the Tanaim in the Mishnah stems from the different opinions regarding when the 2 loaves and the shewbread are consecrated in the heaven's sanctity. According to the opinion of the first Tana, they become consecrated from when they are baked in the oven, not when they are measured in a vessel. Consequently, the kneading and forming of the loaves which precede the baking may be performed even outside the temple courtyard. Rabbi Yehuda maintains that, like other meal offerings, these loaves are consecrated when they are placed in a service vessel, and therefore all the actions must be performed in the courtyard. Finally, Rabbi Shimon contends that all the stages of preparation of the 2 loaves and the shewbread may be performed outside the temple courtyard, including their baking. In this opinion, the 2 loaves are consecrated upon the slaughter of the 2 lambs that accompany them, while the shewbread is consecrated when it is placed on the table. Yet another opinion, that of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, is cited on 47a. The 2 loaves are consecrated only when the blood of the lambs is sprinkled. The kneading of their dough and the forming of the loaves take place outside the temple courtyard, but their baking takes place inside the temple courtyard. The kneading and forming of the 2 loaves and the shewbread are performed outside the temple courtyard. The baking is performed inside the courtyard. I'm going to say for Vod Hilchot Timidim Misafim 5787, and the preparation is not over by Shabbat. Rabbi Yehuda says all the procedures involved in the preparation take place inside the courtyard. Rabbi Shimon says one should always be accustomed to say that the 2 loaves and the shewbread are fit if they are prepared in the temple courtyard, and they are also fit if they were prepared in Beis Pagay. What's that? Beis Pagay. An explanation are suggested for the term Beis Pagay. It seems that the wall of Beis Pagay was the 3rd wall of Jerusalem, but built in the 1st century CE by King Agrippa to encompass the northward expansion of the city. Several commentaries are of the opinion that it was called Beis Pagay based on the Greek root phago, meaning to eat. In this area, it is permitted to eat sacrificial foods because it was within the city limits of Jerusalem. Alternatively, from the Hebrew word pagim, and ripe figs. Apparently, there was also a small village near Jerusalem that is called Beit Pagai, perhaps due to the fig trees that grew there. Said the Temple Mount, as he maintained that they may be baked outside the Temple courtyard. The Gemara. The Mishnah states that according to the opinion of the first Tana, the 2 loaves and the shubed are needed and shaped outside the Temple courtyard, but they're baked inside the courtyard. The Gemara comments, this itself is difficult. The Gemara elaborates. You said initially that the kneading of the dough and the forming of the loaves take place outside the temple courtyard. One can infer from this that apparently the dry measure, i.e. the vessel used in the temple for measuring dry substances, e.g. flour, is not consecrated. If the dry measure sanctify the items placed in them, the flour brought for the 2 loaves and the shubed would already be sanctified, and these loaves could not be kneaded and shaped outside the courtyard. And the Mishnah subsequently states that their baking takes place inside the temple courtyard. One can infer from this that apparently the dry measure was consecrated. If the flour had not been sanctified by being placed in the measuring vessel, why must the loaves be baked inside the temple courtyard? Rabbi says, a formidable man who is tough as iron. Tosfos cited the Gemara elsewhere in Tanit 4a, which states that any Torah scholar who is not as tough as iron, but is indecisive and wavers, is not a Torah scholar. Rashi explains here that this categorization refers to a scholar with a sharp intellect who is likened to a sharp iron knife, raises difficulty. And who is that sage? This is referring to Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet was a well-known Babylonian Amor who lived during the 2nd and 3rd generation of Amoraim. He was a preeminent disciple of Rav Huna and a colleague of Rav Naaman and Rav Chisda. He was outstanding in his knowledge of the Mishnah and the Baitot, which he acquired through his exceptional diligence and despite the fact that he was blind. Due to his comprehensive familiarity with even the most obscure areas of old law, he was nicknamed Sinai. Many of the sages of the generation came to study with him primarily because it was assumed that his statements were invariably based on early sources. He was knowledgeable in all aspects of life and was a frequent visitor to the house of Exalach. He was characteristically extremely forceful and did not defer even before highly distinguished individuals. Apparently, Rav Sheshet supported himself as a garment merchant and lived comfortably from his earnings. With regard to his disputes with Rav Nachman, the Gaonim state that the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Sheshet in all matters of ritual law. Many Amoraim of the 3rd and 4th generation were his disciples, including Rava. Rav Sheshet had no sons; he had 1 daughter and several grandchildren. The Gemara asks, what is the difficulty? Perhaps the measure of 1/10 of an ephah, which is used to measure the flour for 2 loaves and the shubed, does not sanctify that which is placed inside it, but the oven sanctifies the loaves that are baked in it, and therefore they must be baked inside the temple courtyard. Rather, if the Mishnah is difficult, this is difficult. The Mishnah states that the baking of the 2 loaves and the shubed takes place inside the courtyard. Evidently, the oven sanctifies that which is baked inside it. And the Mishnah subsequently states that kneading, shaping, and baking the loaves do not override Shabbat. If these procedures were performed before Shabbat, in a vessel that sanctifies them, the loaves would then be disqualified by virtue of the fact they were left overnight without having been placed on the table. Rather, Rava says a formidable man who is as tough as iron raises difficulty, and who is that sage? This is referring to Rav Sheshet. Rav Ashi said, what is the difficulty? Perhaps the oven does not sanctify the loaves that are baked in it, and therefore the 2 loaves and the shubed are not disqualified by being left overnight. And accordingly, what is the meaning of the statement that baking takes place inside? This is not referring to inside the temple courtyard, rather it means that they are baked in a place where there are priests who are vigilant in their efforts, who will supervise the loaves as they are baked and ensure that they have not become leavened. The Gemara knows, and this statement attributed to Rav Ashi is an error. A baruta, what's that? A baruta, the root of this word is bar, external, i.e. it is a statement that is unworthy of being included and discussed in the study hall. It is a euphemistic way of referring to a mistaken opinion without declaring outright that it is false, the Orach. The very meaning is baduta, meaning a fabrication, i.e. the statement in question was never issued by the sage to whom it is attributed. Written above, Metzia 71b. This is an expression of respect for the sage whose opinion is rejected, as it is a denial of the idea that he made such an error. As whichever way you look at it is difficult. If we require vigilant priests for the baking of the 2 loaves and the shubed, we should also require vigilant priests for the kneading and forming of the loaves. And if we do not require vigilant priests for the kneading and forming of the loaves, we should not require vigilant priests for the baking. Rav Ashi's explanation does not explain why the Mishnah differentiates between the kneading and forming of the loaves on the one hand, and the baking on the other hand. Rather, the statement is attributed to Rav Ashi is an error. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Huda says all the procedures involved in the preparation of the two loaves and shubha take place inside the temple courtyard, whereas Rabbi Shimon maintains that even the baking may take place inside the courtyard. Rabbi Abahu Bar Kahana says both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon derived their opinions from the same verse, which they interpreted homiletically. According to the straightforward meaning of the verses, Ahimelech said to David that he would give him the consecrated shewbread, provided that David and the men of Ahimelech thought were accompanying him were richly pure. David replied that the vessels were sacred, richly pure, even though he and those accompanying him were engaged in non-sacred matter, which did not require them to maintain a state of purity. The Gemara here interprets the verse as a halachic statement. When David fled from King Saul, he came to Nov, where he requested bread from Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech replied, "There is no non-sacred bread under my hand, but there is sacred bread." In 1 Samuel 21:5, the shewbread, David said to Ahimelech, "But it is a non-sacred manna, and yet it shall be consecrated today in the vessel." In 1 Samuel 21:6. Both sages understand David's point to be a halachic critique. Rabbi Huda holds that David found the priest baking the shewbread on a weekday. David said to them, "Why are you baking the shewbread in a non-sacred manner? On a weekday rather than Shabbat. Yet it shall be consecrated today in the vessel, i.e. it will be consecrated today when it is baked in the oven, and it will be disqualified tomorrow because it will have been left overnight." Rabbi Huda inferred that David's criticism that shewbread must be baked on Shabbat in the temple courtyard, as it is consecrated in the oven. Rabbi Shimon holds that David found the priest baking the shewbread on Shabbat. David said to them, "Aren't you required to prepare it in a non-sacred manner, on a weekday? Doesn't the oven consecrate the shewbread?" "No, it is the table that consecrates it when the shewbread is placed there. The loaves and therefore not disqualified by being left overnight." The Gemara asks, "Now can you say that David found the priest at the time of baking? But isn't it subsequently written, and the priest gave him sacred bread? For there was no bread there but the shewbread that was taken from before the Lord," in 1 Samuel 21:7. Indicates David received the shewbread that had always been put on the table, not loaves that had just been baked. Rather, what is the meaning of the statement? "But it is a non-sacred manner, and yet it shall be consecrated today in the vessel," which David said to the priest. The Gemara replies, "This is what the priest said to him. There is no bread except the shewbread that was taken before the Lord, and the shewbread is prohibited for consumption by the non-priest." David said to the priest, "It is not necessary to say that it is permitted for me to eat the shewbread, for which has already been removed from the table. This is because the frankincense placed in the bowl that were on the table has been burned. Since the shewbread has been removed from having the state of items to which the halachot of misuse of consecrated property apply, Me'ilah, misuse of consecrated property, the halachot of misuse of consecrated property are presented briefly in the Torah, see Leviticus 5:14-16, and are expanded upon in Talmud Me'ilah. Misuse of consecrated property refers to the unintentional use for personal gain of items that have been consecrated to the temple. One who unintentionally made use of consecrated property is required to donate to the temple the value of the item that was used, with an additional charge of 1/5 of its value, and to bring a guilt offering to atone for the offense. It is considered a non-sacred matter, i.e. permitted to priest for consumption, but even the other shewbread which shall be consecrated today in the vessel, the shewbread placed on the table today, you should give him, you should give me to eat. Thank you for listening, and I wish you all the best, and Gamar Chatima Tova, and all the best for the new year. Bye.